These ideas can exist outside of you, or they can exist inside of you. Outside of you is, I walk in the classroom, I have pre-planned my lecture, for example, and I could be animated, could be very articulate, maybe even inspired. But once the class is over, I just walk back into life. Nothing wrong with that. You know, it's like teaching a philosophy 101. The subject for the semester is unpacking the Rafa. I think it's a great project for those of you who are, you could propose that to your chair and the dean, and maybe they'll say yes. And you can just entertain those ideas for 4 or 5 months. Having the ideas inside you is very, very different in the sense that by the time these ideas mature inside, you have lost so much of your contact with life. And in life, there are the people in your family, there are your friends, there may be a spouse, children, job, money, it doesn't really matter. Whatever gave you anchor and meaning, whatever belonged to you in life, they will not matter as much. And it doesn't mean that you have no empathy, it doesn't mean that you have no compassion, it doesn't mean that you don't grieve their loss. But before you lose those things physically, right now my father is alive. At his age, anytime I get a phone call and it's my mom and her voice sounds a little strange, I'm going to say, oh, something happened to my dad. So there is the passing of my father, which is the physical death, which is of course sad. But when you play with these ideas, because your father at this, when you're like in your 20s, he has no longer any power over you. You don't respect him, you don't fear him, his experiences don't really nourish you, his ideas don't reach you, nothing about him has any value for you. Except later on in life, you just kind of look back and say, he's just a very decent man, he's a good man. And so you are physically detached, emotionally detached. You still love your dad, just in case he gets sick, you're going to go visit him in Roseville. But before the physical death arrives, the emotional death has been in play for almost 20, 30 years. And eventually with the physical passing of your father, your emotions get tested as well, which means that ideas are going to be paused for a little bit. You're going to realize that, I should have spent more time with my dad. I should have gone to Roseville perhaps a bit more often. But that separation between you and your father took place many, many years ago. And in fact, that separation between you and life, many branches of life, many layers of it, it took place the moment you really began to take these ideas very, very, very seriously. When you're sick, it's really difficult to think about other people and to have any desire to care for them. When you approach a book like Daughter of Fire, you're talking about a woman who is like intellectually sick because she's so confused, emotionally sick because her life is meaningless, spiritually sick because she's looking for a soul but she doesn't have one yet. And so no one in your life exists. And the first layer of grief that you experience is the death of your own life. You become really self-absorbed. And there are many, I think, instances where you think about ending your life completely because you don't have much of a life. You don't have parents. And all of us desire to be understood. Your parents are the closest people to you, perhaps, and they don't understand you. Next, your siblings, they don't understand you. You read the books, and the books say some really, really nice things, but you want to touch the ideas, you want to taste the ideas, but all you can really experience is just ink on paper. And after a while, you realize it's really offensive when someone like Plato talks about getting out of the cave and talks to you as a prisoner, that you've been in the world of Maya for all these years. And though intellectually it sounds really good, emotionally, Plato can't reach you. Unless you happen to be in a very specific mood where you don't look at Plato as an intellectual philosopher, but someone who actually understands both emotionally, spiritually, intellectually. So your capacity to grieve lessens, immensely lessens. Rumi has this, I don't know if it's his last poem or not. دردی است غیر مردن کان را دوا نباشد پس من چگونه گویم کاین درد را دوا کن. that there is this pain that you have. And when a pain is not remedied, if there is no cure for it, sadness comes forth, and then sorrow comes forth, and then grief begins to kind of blossom inside you. And with grief comes a great amount of loneliness. I mean, that's what sadness and grief do. They just make you very, very lonely. You become a stranger to yourself. And you lose a lot of power. And one of the most important things you and I desire in life is power, because power allows us control over our emotions, over just physical life, other people. And so grief removes all of that from you. And after a while, like any patient who has found no remedy to their disease, you kind of just give up. I mean, there is your wife or your husband, and the pain is too much. And Rumi says the only way this pain can be remedied is death. There is no other way. And this is not like emotional death or spiritual death. When you're just physically no longer there, when like Jesus in the Gospel of Judas, when you physically die and your soul goes to God, you're not down here, you don't look at people, you don't feel bad for them, you don't feel sorry for them. You just lose the ability to care, period, in death. And so, so you have two siblings. One happens to be very much embodying the emotions and the ideas in Daughter of Fire. The other approaches it as just a wonderful piece of literature. And then both siblings experience the death of their father or their mother or something, or maybe they got cancer, whatever the case may be. The one who finds him or herself in the book, actually, they have been sick for a long time. It's just not a physical sickness. It's an emotional sickness. It's a mental sickness. It's a spiritual sickness. And so they've been in the grieving mode for a long, long, long time. And even if you have moments of, say, inspiration or breakthroughs or enlightenment, the curtains or the veils shut, and you find yourself again on the outside, and you long for it to once again be open so you can have a glimpse. So it's this kind of darkness and light, and you have no power over any of this stuff. And so you have the brother who simply looks at the book as a nice piece of writing, and he happens to be very close to the parent. They break down and they grieve for a long, long time. The other one who to some extent maybe is living out the emotions and the thoughts in the book, they haven't had a father for a long time. It doesn't mean that they don't appreciate the memories that they had with their parent. But those emotions those histories no longer do anything for the person, because they're on a path that no one can reach them. And so you have two people loving their father very, very much, and yet the reaction is very, very different. The one who has lived the book, he has been orphaned for a long, long time. His ability to grieve, his ability to have empathy, his ability to be generous is going to be very different than the one who simply looks at the book as a nice piece of literature. It's an interesting story about Ramana Maharishi when his mother was sick. I think she had cancer. And eventually she found out where, Ramana is. And, it's an interesting thing. You're a 12-year-old kid, you have an experience, and you realize that your mother worries about your physical well-being. She wants you to get married, she wants you to have children, she wants you to have a house. But you have an experience where you realize you're more than your physical body. And the experience is so intense that you'd actually stop caring for the things that your mother cares for. You are her son. She loves you. She wants to protect you. And this is India. The poverty is everywhere, and she wants something better for her son than she herself had. But all of a sudden, Ramana ceases to care for those things. He drops out of school, and he just goes somewhere for many, many years. And by this time, you have a mother who's old, who's wrinkled, who's sick, and the only family she has is a son. And she doesn't know where he is. And so she goes on this long quest, and eventually she finds him. And he looks at her and he says, "You're going to die, you're sick. There is no grieving. This is not a man." It's kind of like Jesus. You walk back to Nazareth, but you don't go to see your mom, you don't go to see your siblings, you don't go to see your father, you don't see anyone. You just go directly to the synagogue and you begin to preach some gospel. So he just puts his hand on her chest. So just close your eyes, rest, and you can die in peace. And that's what happened. So when you speak about grief, it really depends on who you are, where you are, what you've been exposed to. The idea that you have to die before you're dead in the Islamic tradition. I mean, it's a devastating. I mean, it's a tiny little phrase, to die before you're dead. Hussein, not the teacher Hussein, but the student Hussein. Even the teacher Hussein. Sometimes Shadia would look at him and say, Hussein, you were waiting for me? Yeah, I was waiting for you. Really? Shadia was very surprised whenever Hussein would wait for her to come to the table. Or I remember she was a little late ending her class at Sierra College. She was supposed to be at my parents' house in Roseville like at 8:30, it was 8:45, then 9, then 9:15. And now Hussein was outside. And then Shadia drives up and she sees Hussein. Hussein, what's going on? Why are you so late? What happened to you? I just finished class. You came out here for me? I said, yeah, I was worried about you. And so it's interesting because from the age like 20, Hussein was very self-absorbed, in the sense that he wanted to understand a few things about life. If he has a soul, if there's a God, if these experiences that he's having have any reality to them, or it's just a figment of his imagination. And so when you're that self-absorbed, the idea of you being, outreaching to people, it just doesn't exist. Everybody is there to serve you, and you can't serve anyone. It's not that you don't want to. It just is no longer in your capacity. Your goals have changed. The focus of your emotions and your thoughts, everything about you has changed. And so the idea that you have to die before you're dead, everything that exists in your life becomes irrelevant. Everything. My father's sister, my aunt, she was in the hospital. She was almost dead. So she asks her husband, where is Nuruddin? This is, her eldest son. She had 5. And Aghay Elmi, her husband, would say, oh, he'll come, don't worry. He's just busy, he'll be here. And she kept asking and asking and asking because she thought she was going to die and she wanted to see him before passing. And eventually, her husband couldn't hold back. He said to her, listen, he just died. He had cancer and he passed away. And so here is the mother, she's 70, she is sick herself, she's, close to passing herself. Her scream is like a whimper, she sheds a few tears. And then again, her own pain comes to the surface. And the thought of her having lost a son just kind of goes to the background because now the pain, her own pain, is in the foreground. And you realize as a mother whose son happens to be like 60, you would assume that she's going to like cry and scream. None of those things, because she was far too self-absorbed. And so those, I think, who go on the spiritual quest, the way that Irina did, they really lose a lot of abilities. They become, I don't know if they become less human or they become more human, in the sense that their emotional reactions to things, the stuff that you and I deem to be important and valuable, for them is really not that valuable or important. I think one of the difficult things that happened to Hussein, the student, was that he really did lose the ability to care. I think the tragedy in his life was that he got old and he got sick, and he needed people to take care of him. But he had mistreated his family life so much that his wife got sick, and then his daughter got sick, and then his physical life was a complete mess. And then he retired too early and he was locked up in this house, and he never left the house. And, by this time, he realized that, kind of like what you read in Bennett, that Bennett could see no authority than himself, that he had come to a place where he understood the kind of essential points that Hussein was talking about, and the essential things that Hussein would inspire in terms of feeling. He had his own unique set of experiences, his own dreams. And he had this amazing faith about him. He would pray 50, 60 times a day. And he was so wrapped up in this world that he couldn't really much care. I'm sure once in a while he would get angry. But what these ideas had done to him, this was his family, and this was him. Once in a while he would enter family life, make an observation, and that observation forced him to scream, to yell, to fight, and walk away angry. Then he would calm down, go back into his own world. And when he would come to my parents' house, before he got really sick, every time we would ask him, "So Hussein, how are you doing?" "I pray for death, it's just not coming and I don't know why." Dad, you would say, "Well, you still have a wife. So what? You still have a daughter." "Yep. But so what? This place has nothing more to offer me." And you realize that someone grieves because they're still alive, and they grieve because they're alive and life has nothing to offer them. It's a very strange sorrow to have inside. It's very elevated, very evolved. If you have a life and you like that life, I don't even think that this needs to be said at all. I think every person comes to a crosspoint where they really come to realize they're going a little too far, and something about their own organism just pulls them back to safety. And even if someone was to say to someone, like a Gurdjieff was to say to some chap that, "Listen, these ideas can be very dangerous. My advice is go back home." The truth is, you don't even need to say those things, because 99.9% of the time, people eventually go back to the place that's comfortable for them. They're not going to cross any lines that's going to devastate their life completely, unless, something about them has just been broken very seriously by someone like a Gurdjieff or a Krishnamurti. Hussein had cancer the last 2 years of his life. His grieving period was about 2 years. He fought, I think, the first maybe year. It wasn't even 2 years. I think 7 months, that was it. He was diagnosed and 7 months later he died. So he lived for the first 68 years of his life with a good amount of hope, and his life was good. We had a great community. Kazem's house, Yadi's house, Hussein's house, our house. It was an amazing time. Hussein had a really, really good life. He was just always in the cradle of ideas and conversation. Then he had this pain, then there was the diagnosis, then it was the grieving mode, which was, man, I got this disease. Is there a way out of it? They tried, to no avail. And then, of course, you're sad because you have a daughter, you have a wife, and you're going to leave them behind, and you have no idea what's going to happen to them. And of course, you didn't expect yourself to pass so quickly. And so his grieving mode was about maybe 3, 4, 5 months before he said, "You know what? I think I am done. I'm just going to starve myself, and it's time to go." And he did. The people who are left behind, his wife, his daughter is far too young, and kids that young are, they don't really understand any of this stuff because they haven't really spent too much time with their parents, and they're just experimenting with life, exploring, so they're very distracted, which is really healthy for kids because they don't have to think about a parent who's no longer there. But his wife, Shadia, that's a different story. First, she doesn't come from a tradition where she can just go out there and date. That's impossible. Second, she's 60-some, which makes it even more impossible. Third, she can't find anyone like Hussein. And even if she did, I doubt very much that the arousal of guilt inside her would allow her to continue with that kind of a relationship. And so what you have is people who are left behind. Their grieving period is far longer than someone like Hussein. Unless, you have struggled with something your entire life, you've never been able to overcome it, and something about you no longer desires to be here, and you just go away. And then those who are left behind, sure, there is some guilt, there is some regret, there is some remorse, but everybody's life is busy, and there is this wonderful ability that exists in all of us, which is the ability to forget. And you forget and your life continues. Again, someone like Bai Sahib or someone like Iruna Tweedy, this mechanism of forgetfulness, it's just not there. It's gone. You can only forget what you're looking for, maybe for 10 minutes, maybe for 20 minutes, laughter here, a party there, but for the most part, it's like cancer. It's always like a shadow following you. And so, for someone like Irina Tweedy, grief and sorrow are always with you, always with you. And so, when someone dies, for example, you sit back and you say, well, what exactly did they live for? Anyways, I mean, by the time you get to the spiritual quest, life is just stupid. I mean, anyone who lives life and is attached to life is stupid. You know, and in some ways it could be helpful that on this journey you lose so much. At the same time, you know, there are parts of you that are just human. And you say, you know what, a companion isn't bad. And you don't do it because of romantic reasons. You do it for political reasons. You do it because you understand that, I mean, you pray for a gentle passing in your sleep. You're also fearful of the fact that you may get old, you may get sick. And it's not going to be as easy as you thought it to be. That it's going to be a very painful exit from life. You say, well, if that's the case, maybe I should have a companion. My brother has his own life, my sister has her own life, you know. Friends are, you know, they come and they go. You know, and I don't want to be ending up in a nursing home, because strangers don't really care, you know, especially the ones who are a bit older. You know, when you make political decisions, you've understood a good amount of life. And once in a while, those relationships give you sparks of love and inspiration and excitement. You know, when yesterday I went to my dean to talk about some of the complaints, this is no longer like a 20-year-old woman. She's like 60, I think. And I know it's just education, 90% of it is about politics. And I don't know if people are just scared to be honest, or maybe they're just complete idiots. To speak so casually about teaching and learning, you really, you know, and if you happen to be someone like Irina Tweedy, you lose a lot of respect for life, you lose a lot of respect for people who live in life. And so in some ways, it gives you a good amount of freedom, but it also brings with it a good amount of sadness.